It's my great pleasure to introduce three amazing academics, wonderful colleagues who are going to talk about various aspects of platform strategy. I will introduce them now, and they will tell you about what they'll talk about as they start. The first speaker is Melissa Schilling. Melissa is a professor here. She's also a co-director of the Fubon Center with me, so she's a partner in crime. I could list her accolades for another 10-15 minutes, but I wanted to say that not only she has one of the best-selling textbooks on technology management and strategy, she is also the author of a more recent book. Now here is, I used to teach about Quirky as a platform, and students could not understand what I was saying. So forgive my Russian accent. I'm going to try my best to name your book, which is Quirky. Quirky, the kids correct me as in this pronunciation, Q-I-R-K-Y. I read the book, even though I can't properly pronounce the name. It's a wonderful reading because it's stories of inventors and great innovators and how they came to be who they are. It's not an academic recommendation. It's kind of beach and pleasure time reading. So I loved it and enjoyed it very much. And Melissa will give the first talk. The second talk is by a guest of ours here at Stern, Aya Leipinen, who is a professor at Cornell. Aya is a strategy professor who studies the competition in technology markets. She in particular looks into question of cooperation among competitors when it comes to setting standards, which I personally believe is one of the most important and interesting areas in this platform strategy business. So I'm looking forward to your talk. And last but not least is my newest colleague and a dear friend already, Hanna Halaburda, who is a professor in my department, Technology Operations Statistics. Hanna just joined us, but she has an illustrious career before that in both academia and in the government/industry, where she has spent 6 years in the Bank of Canada as a senior economist, setting their block strategy on cyber currency. She has another great book that I'm deeply familiar with on cyber currencies. I highly recommend this book. It's really in-depth look into that question. And Hanna is an expert in platform competition. With that said, I will give the stage to these three wonderful colleagues. And Melissa, please.
So thank you all for coming. It's really exciting to be here. I'm going to talk about some research that comes out of a stream of research I'm doing. My co-author's actually here. Joost is here somewhere. Where are you, Joost? There he is. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the research that we're doing on platform orchestration and platform strategy. So as I'm sure all of you know here, a platform is often something, a product or a service that's mediating the relationship between a bunch of other products and a customer base, consumers, or even industrial customers. So for example, Spotify is a service that's a platform mediating the relationship between you and a bunch of music. The App Store is mediating the relationship between you and a bunch of apps. Now, platforms have some really interesting characteristics, and the owner of the platform often has an unusual amount of influence on outcomes in this overall ecosystem, even though they don't own or directly control all of the players in the ecosystem. So that's a little bit what we're going to talk about today. And the title's a little bit ironic because I'm actually going to end up telling you that stars aren't born, they're made. And I'm going to show you how. But first, let's talk about the fact that these markets are often very tippy. And we know platforms tend to be tippy and that there's often really strong forces like network externalities encouraging consumers to all choose the same platform because they get more compliments that way. But the compliments are also often tippy. So a lot of these markets have what we call blockbuster effects. So for example, Fortnite, how many of you guys have played Fortnite? Like, how many of you guys have kids who've played Fortnite? Okay, so I have a manic 11-year-old who does little else but play Fortnite. Fortnite is a very, very successful game. And what you're seeing in this chart is that it's 10 times as successful as the 10th most popular game in the world. So you're already looking at the very top end of popularity of games, and you're seeing incredible skew here, where Fortnite is just incredibly more popular than the others. Similarly, on Steam, PlayerUnknown, this game over here, which I haven't played this one, is vastly more popular than all of the other top-ranked games on Steam. WhatsApp right now is by far and away the leading downloaded app in the world. And you're seeing that it's, look at the difference between downloads of WhatsApp versus Twitter or Amazon, which are also incredibly ubiquitous apps. So you're seeing these incredible blockbuster effects. And then if you were listening to Drake's God's Plan last year, you had a lot of company. You were not very unique in that decision, because for almost half of the year, Drake's God's Plan was the most played song, most streamed song in the world. And look at the difference between how many times it was the most played song versus all of these other hits. And the last one I'm going to show you in this vein is Black Panther, which earned 10 times the revenues of Peter Rabbit, which Peter Rabbit was a big success. It was the 10th most highest selling movie in 2018, but Black Panther earned almost 10 times as much as Peter Rabbit. So in these blockbuster markets where a few compliments could be enormous successes, you ought to be wondering, how do we light that fire that becomes a star? Like, where do stars come from? Are stars always the highest quality application or game or movie? Is there something, do they get more support from their producers or from the platform? And that's what we're going to look at. First, we're going to look at what causes tippy markets, and then we're going to look at how platforms can exploit those tippy markets to create stars and who they try to create into stars. So first, there's two main mechanisms that are going to make these markets tippy. The first one I've already alluded to. It's network externalities. Network externalities are markets where consumers or customers get more value the more other users there are of the same or similar good. So for example, you use a social media site where all your friends are, because it wouldn't be much good if you got onto a social media site and you couldn't find many of your friends. So the site becomes more valuable the more popular it is. You choose the operating system on your computer based on the operating system everyone else is using, even if it's not your favorite. Because that's the system that's going to be most compatible with your friends at work, with people you exchange files with. It's going to have the most applications available for it. So these things create tippy markets. But another thing that creates tippy markets is social referral. What that means is that a lot of these markets are driven by word-of-mouth contact between people that know each other. And that means that a small advantage in popularity early can translate into a large advantage in popularity later. Because if you figure each person, let's say each person knows 10 people, and each of those 10 people knows 10 people, and each of those people knows 10 people, you get to huge numbers really, really fast. And if you seed that initial referral by one recommendation of a game that somebody likes, that game can end up being referred through a network in such a way that it becomes vastly more popular. Now, the platform can influence which of these complements takes off. They can really shape whose stars are likely to light. This is just an example. The effect is really, really large. They can use selective promotion. They basically have the ability to make search lists. They can control who shows up at the top of a search list, who's in a featured category, who gets a best of award, whose picture is on the box that gets bundled with the platform, right? There are a lot of ways you can shine that big, shiny searchlight onto particular complements in your ecosystem. And when you do that, you can vastly boost the adoption of that complement. So here's an example where it's showing that if Apple featured your game as like a recommended game, it could increase sales of that game by close to 300% in many cases. Spotify is single-handedly attributed with having made the stardom of Ed Sheeran in the way that they promoted him. Video game companies use this too, and I'm going to show you the effect of it. Video games often choose particular titles to give best of awards or classic awards. If they feature them, they rebox them, they put an award on it, it's going to show up on the top of lists. And doing this has a really, really big effect on the sales of those games. And one way we tested this is a really cool matched pair setup. We took games where the games are on two different consoles and they're identical. They're the exact same game. So Grand Theft Auto was on both Xbox 360 and on PlayStation, what are we talking here? The PlayStation 3. Identical game, but it only gets endorsed with a best of award on one of the consoles. And what you're seeing, that green hump in sales there, is the effect of that award. So that's showing how even if we strip out, like here, there's no differences in the game. There's not even major differences in people's awareness of the game, but giving it that best of award has a huge effect on the sales performance of the game. So the message you should be getting here is that the platform has a lot of opportunity to influence the success of individual complements in that ecosystem. So the next question you ought to be asking is, how did they decide who to help? Who are they boosting? Is it always the highest selling compliment? Do we just pick out the ones that are selling best and tell everybody about that? Is it the one with the best reviews? Is it the one that gives us the best royalty terms? Or maybe we're always trying to boost only our own compliments? How do they choose? And the answer is sophisticated platforms are choosing in ways that are much more strategic than you imagine. It usually isn't just the highest selling app, and it almost is never just the highest reviewed app. They're using a complex web of strategies to figure out who to boost. So we took a big data set using all 7th generation video games launched into the UK market in the 7th generation, and we followed them over time. We controlled for all sorts of features like who the publisher was, the release date, the price, console installed base. We did all this work, and we came up with 3 main outcomes that I want to talk to. One of them came primarily from the interview data, so we also talked to the senior execs at a bunch of platforms. And the 3 main outcomes are, first of all, it's not the top-selling games that get boosted, that get awards. It's the up-and-comers. It's the good but not best sellers. And this is probably because the best sellers, they've already been unlocked. That value is unlocked. People know about them. So there's less signal value in telling people about that game. But if there's a game you think has potential to become a star, and it's not a star yet, there's a lot more value you can unlock in that game by promoting it to people. And the other thing is you probably have better royalty terms with a game that is not a star yet. So you're going to be able to capture more of that value. So there's more value to be unlocked, and you're going to be able to capture more of it yourself if you're the platform. So that's a really interesting thing. When you hear best of, it's not the highest selling game. In fact, it's the good but not best selling games, and they are significantly more likely to be featured and to get awards. The next one is another interesting one. Ecosystem completers is what we call this. We're probably the first people to use this term, and Joost is looking at me thinking, I'm not sure you mentioned this to me before. But I needed a term, Joost. Ecosystem completers. This is when you have an ecosystem that has categories, and consumers care about multiple categories, and you're missing, you have a category that's weak, and as a result, people are going with somebody else's platform. So for example, if you're a gaming platform and you don't have a good racing simulator, that's a real hole in your lineup. Or if you were an app platform and you didn't have a music streaming application, a strong one, that would be a real hole in your platform. That alone would move people to another platform. So consoles and other kinds of platforms, they're looking at their whole ecosystem, and they're saying, in order to compete more against that other platform, that other ecosystem, where do I need to be stronger? How do I make my ecosystem look more robust, more replete? And so what they'll do is they'll target a complement, even if it's not a terribly strong complement, even if it's not a big seller. If it's in a category they need to make stronger, they will put their attention and effort and money into that complement and build it into a star, so that now they have stars in all the major categories. It's a completer. The last one is another interesting one that we got directly from the managers at these companies, and we call this platform showcasers. So sometimes there's a range of applications you could use on a device, but there's one that's really designed to take advantage of all the features in your device. In gaming, there are games, for example, that they say plays best on Xbox. And what that means is that the game itself may be available on the Xbox and on the PlayStation, but it plays better on Xbox. If you're a gaming console and you've just launched a box with real advantages in fidelity, for example, you want to highlight games that exploit that fidelity, that will show consumers that fidelity so that consumers think, wow, Xbox is so much better than PlayStation. And the same is true for lots and lots of other kinds of platforms. So platform showcasers are also significantly more likely to be awarded and featured and sponsored. Surprisingly, what was not more likely to be awarded, it's not on the slide here, I'm just going to tell you personally, platforms were not more likely, it's interesting, to give awards to their own complements. So we found, for example, that video game consoles were far less likely to give their own games awards. We don't know exactly why. We suspect it has to do with the fact that that's pretty plain self-dealing. It's pretty obvious to people when you're giving your own compliments awards, and maybe that would erode your trust with the consumer. It might also be that the platform has available to them more nuanced ways of making sure you find out about their complements, whereas they're using these very blatant, obvious ways to help you find out about other firms' complements. As an aside, I don't put it up here on the slides because I'm not entirely sure how much we're supposed to talk myself right into a ditch right here. I'm just going to note that sometimes the decision about which complement gets picked to get an award is actually negotiated between the owner of the complement and the owner of the platform and the producer of the complement. And it's a negotiation that's going to influence all kinds of things like loyalty and royalty rates. So it might not be as objective as you might at first assume. Okay, so what are some of the implications? First of all, sophisticated platforms are really thinking very strategically about who to shine that light on, which complements to promote. That means when you do a hotel search and a list of hotels comes up, you should not assume that that list is sorted by quality of the reviews, number of the reviews, price point, and match with the features that you selected. It might be influenced by an array of other things that you haven't even considered that affect the value to the platform themselves, like how much of the value they can capture. When you direct attention to particular complements, you can actually turn them into stars. Obviously, once complements are stars, they have a lot more bargaining power. You can see this really clearly with Grand Theft Auto, for example. When it became a blockbuster hit, it was initially an exclusive game to Sony. As soon as it became a blockbuster hit, they turned around and said, no more exclusives, Sony. We're going to go on the other consoles now, too. And they got better royalty terms after that. Grand Theft Auto got better royalty terms after that. So once a star is a star, they might not be as attractive to the platform in some ways. They're still attractive, of course, because they draw a lot of consumers to the platform. But making stars is more attractive, still very attractive. Third piece here, so as I already mentioned, often complements that receive the best of awards are not the best on any particular metric, and they may not even be the best on any combination of metrics. What they're the best at may be unlocking value for the platform itself. So when you're trying to figure out how Amazon came to this decision to recommend this product to you, you have to bear that in the back of your mind. All right? And then last but not least, so this is really interesting. One of the reasons we studied video games is that there's a lot of data, and they've been around for a long time, and they're heavy, heavy computers, and they have multiple generations of competition that have played out where there have been winners and losers. And as a result, video game consoles, the video game ecosystems, they've become very sophisticated. Those companies know how to compete in platforms extremely well. I often see platforms in other industries that aren't nearly as sophisticated because they're newer. They just haven't learned these lessons. They haven't had as many times at bat yet. So one thing that you should take away from this research here is that unsophisticated platforms should be paying really close attention to the tricks and strategies used by sophisticated platforms because they can learn how to more strategically create and capture value in their ecosystems. Thanks. So we have some time to take questions, if there are any questions. One of the papers based on this research, by the way, just came out, and it's open access, so you can get it for free. It's called Platform Strategy, Managing Ecosystem Value, and there's more there. You can probably just Google a few of those terms, and you'll get it. No questions? Because we are running a little behind schedule, so we could just go to the next one. OK, right here. Yeah.
In the case of iOS as Swift or something like that. Do you see that having an impact on the tippiness of certain complements, or is there any interplay there?
So I'm going to go back a few generations and talk about preferential access to the platform specifications itself. One of the ways that Microsoft orchestrated its ecosystem of complements and actually put whole companies out of business and turned other companies into stars is by giving some of them deeper or better access to the specifications of Windows itself so that their applications would run better. They could make some applications run better, and they could make some other applications run worse. They can also manipulate the timing of when they get access to the full specifications. So I mean, that's actually part of how they ended up in courts. But yeah, I totally think building a platform and shaping what tools you give to the complements providers is a great way of orchestrating the platform. Yeah.
Is there any legal or ethical perspective in revealing what the rules are and how they make decisions?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Ethical, almost certainly, right? Unless you come out with a pretty strong buyer beware, best of may not mean what you think it means, right? Legal right now, I don't think there's any protection or any regulation that would address this, and I'm not sure even how practical that would be, because best of, what does best mean in this context? Best to me as the platform, right? From the platform's perspective, this is the best for me, right? But yeah, ethically, it can be a little misleading. In fact, it can be very misleading. And I think they also have to be very careful to avoid particular terms. Like they can't say top pick critics review if it's not a top pick critics review, because somebody could come after them for that.
For consumer products, I can think of something being very harmful, but if, for example, there is some research, some medical or something research that has been funded by a pharmaceutical company, we all expect these days to know that. We expect
Right.
to know that that research has actually been funded by somebody who might have an incentive, and therefore the outcome is biased.
Yeah, that's a great point. Remember when all the toothpaste commercials used to say 4 out of 5 dentists prefer? Yeah. All right, Marshall.
It's an interesting set of investments in which complements to invest in or which ones to feature. How would you trade that against a choice against giving new tools to create new kinds of complements or developer conferences? So one is just a selection among existing things versus actually the creation of new things. How would you choose that?
I think those are very complementary activities. And depending on the type of the platform and how hard it is to build good complements for the platform, that could be a totally necessary function. In some platforms, that may not be so necessary. In some functions, in some platforms, I suspect in music streaming right now, for example, that the format of the music is highly standardized. So you probably don't have to invest a lot in tools for the complements makers. But in something like apps, especially for Google, where you have the changing dimensions of the platform, it's probably extremely important. Oh, I'm out of time. Thank you.
So it's my pleasure to welcome Aya Leiponen.
It's great to be here. Now on to something completely different, hopefully closely enough related to platforms nevertheless. So I'm interested in data in platforms and how we regulate data, how companies are trying to make use of data in platform businesses and other businesses as well. And the subtitle here is, how can you sell something you cannot own? That leads to the next slide. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there is really no ownership of data. Every few weeks online in different contexts, that sort of pops up, and there's this, we should have ownership, we should have property rights for data, and that will solve all our data-related problems. I think that's just a misguided approach to the whole issue to begin with. There is currently, and probably never will be, really meaningful property rights or even intellectual property rights for data. So we just have to live with that situation and figure out other types of strategies that can address the issues that kind of flow from that. And I'll illustrate some of the situations that are strategically really challenging for a lot of companies. So currently, if we look at how data is being commercialized in different settings, it's really based on contractual arrangements between parties. It's based on trade secrets. And it's really difficult to sell secrets. So if you're really successful in selling secrets, they're no longer going to be secrets. And so you see that there's just a kind of inherent difficulty or challenge in these kinds of markets. So the data markets are to a large degree based on trust and relational contracting, and how many people can you trust? Maybe you trust 5 people, maybe you trust 10 people. So that's also going to be, if you're kind of in trust-based businesses, that's going to limit the kind of scaling and size of the market naturally. And the difficult thing about the kind of most perhaps surprising or difficult thing about data markets is that if you end up you're sharing or selling your data, and the party who's getting a hold of the data actually does breach the contract and use it in a way that you didn't intend to, you can sue that party, but you will not get the data back from wherever it's gone. And often it's gone into black markets, to the dark web, or it might be just going to third parties, and then it becomes a very thorny situation to sort out. And here's an example of one very, very thorny situation. Ashley Madison, anyone know about that? Any users? Annabelle is a user. Thank you for sharing your secrets. This is a business about secrets. So online dating site for individuals who are married or in a relationship, launched quite a while ago and still in business. Life is short, have an affair. It's wonderful. A couple of years ago, there was a hacking group called the Impact Team that threatened Ashley Madison so they had downloaded illegally the data and threatened to make that public if Ashley Madison doesn't shut down. So apparently they had something against the company. Ashley Madison didn't agree to that, and that kind of blackmailing, and sure enough, 25 gigabits of data were released a few days later in August of 2015 via BitTorrent and Tor. So my understanding is that nobody has ever figured out who this Impact Team actually was, at least I have not seen any evidence or reporting about that. So whose data are these? They're out there. You can go and get them. You can look at them. They have been extensively reported in the press. There have been divorces. There have been suicides. All sorts of bad outcomes have flowed from this data breach. Reasonable people disagree about this. So we recently have had 2 academic organizations make kind of opposite conflicting statements about what we should be doing about things like illegally or without permission obtained data from online. So Informs, maybe many of the faculty here are members of Informs. Informs policy is that if you scrape data from the web, you have to have the website owner's permission to publish the research in their journals. But the National Academy of Sciences just published a study using the Ashley Madison data. So their lawyers and their leaders decided that it's okay, it's up for grabs to take data that has been illegally released in the first place, if it's in the public domain. So that's interesting. Here's another case which is probably much less well known. A company called Collateral Analytics had a database related to real estate. And they were selling services and the data, the underlying data, to lots of companies, including NationStar. NationStar took much of the data from the database, shared it with a third party called Quantarium, a new company, and intended to kind of go into business or help Quantarium go into business using those data. And so this is a case now ongoing in Northern District of California. Collateral Analytics definitely had a deal with NationStar about confidentiality, but what about Quantarium? They kind of legally obtained the data from that breaching party. So whose data is it? What can they do with that? And moreover, one of the questions in the case is, Collateral Analytics apparently shared the data on PDFs to NationStar, large number of PDFs. So did that company properly maintain the trade secrets? So if you have to maintain secrets in order to commercialize, you get into really difficult situations. So how does this relate to platforms? We're at a conference about platforms. Well, we often see new platforms, new network businesses having the following business model. We'll first get a lot of users. We give the network out to them or the platform to them for free, and then we monetize the data. We also monetize the users by advertising. I mean, that's a very common, at least Cornell students, I get a lot of entrepreneurs who would like to start a new social network and then monetize the data. So we should be kind of clear about what we can do with the data and what are the downsides to that business plan. And we're starting to see the huge privacy and security problems popping up left and right. Facebook investigations, Google is also kind of part of that. The massive data breaches every few months, there's another one. Europe is going in a different direction on this, and platforms that are intending to be global have to kind of deal with different jurisdictions, different regulations in different continents, GDPR is a very strong set of requirements for what you can do with personal data. GDPR has been in force for about a year now, year and a half. And in that time, about $500 million worth of fines have already been decided. And there's a big backlog of cases in the works. And the fines are decided based on percentage of annual revenue. For example, British Airways had a big data breach, and 1.5% of annual revenue was the basis of the fine. So these kinds of issues could also be coming to a state near you. So California Consumer Privacy Act is quite GDPR-like. So it has a lot of kind of starting from the idea that privacy is an inalienable right, that people have that by just being born. They have that right. They have a right to know what data is collected about them, whether it's shared, and they can opt out of the sale of the data, and a few other things. GDPR is, I think, very close to that, but I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that the difference is that it's an opt-in system. So you can't do anything without explicit consent to the personal data of your users. So that's kind of coming. The other angle that's an interesting conversation is, to what degree is data and privacy kind of a competition issue? And there's people in the room who participate in this conversation, so look forward to hearing your perspectives. So can we address competition tendencies to monopolization or market dominance by forcing data sharing in particular industries? And we see some initiatives already going on in Europe, but data portability of social networks, for example, is a kind of a thing that is being debated. So looking ahead, I have spent the past few weeks getting really, really deep into what is 5G and how is it going to change the world. The developers of it definitely believe that it will be a very massive qualitative change in the way communication networks work out in the economy. Much faster mobile broadband, very low latency communications enabling autonomous driving, all sorts of autonomous equipment and vehicles. And then lots and lots of devices, machine-type communication devices everywhere, and lots of data being pulled together, pulled out of devices, out of environments, out of situations. So large-scale personal and industrial data networks, Internet of everything. So how is this going to work out when we can't really control data, either legally or technically or in any way, really? Well, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. Here's just one example that I was actually visiting AT&T just on Monday to talk about some of these issues. And one of the conversations or kind of use cases that we discussed was seaports. And so complicated industrial environments where you have lots of companies getting into, kind of going through this area where there's trucks coming in and bringing stuff into the port. It's being handled often or in the near future by autonomous equipment. And it's lifted around, and then it's put on a ship, and then the ship goes, and then other ships come in. So there's, in a major port, there's hundreds of thousands of companies that enter and exit within any single day. It's a massive logistical operation. So you would maybe have a port authority that has some kind of a management system that sort of takes this data and shares cargo data between the different companies and make it all smooth and digital. Currently, it's not smooth and digital at all, so there's a huge opportunity to make this much more efficient with basically better sharing of data. But if you have hundreds of thousands of companies, shipping and cargo and other kinds of transportation companies, it's just a massive problem of figuring out who should do what, who has access to what, and if the data leaks, it's all confidential data. If data leaks, then what? So these are the kinds of challenges that we're going to be dealing with going forward when we move towards industrial or just generally IoT, Internet of Things kinds of applications. what could be done? These are some of the solutions that industry players are developing. So it could be governmental arrangements, such as the UK Smart Grid Data Agency. I forget what it's called right now. There could be industry consortia, such as the Smart Steel, that's led by some Swedish companies, where kind of a smaller number of firms are getting together and then making, within that kind of trusted network, so it's based on that trust and relational contracting, making arrangements to share amongst those companies. IBM is, of course, deep into all this, and including the Seaport case with their blockchain solutions, trying to make it more verifiable who gets data about what, such that there's fewer opportunities for disputes to arise about who had what and who shared what. Or there could be, this is already in the financial sector, is a common practice where there's a trusted intermediary. The parties don't necessarily see each other's data directly, but there's an intermediary that then handles the kind of aggregates and handles the data. But it doesn't work for all situations. So just to conclude, data can be incredibly valuable, and its value is often leveraged by sharing, but the sharing and selling is a really tricky business to be in. It has to be protected through perhaps smart or relational contracting. But there's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities to doing that. There's of course, there's a lot of flexibility in setting up those contracts. So all of these have to be kind of innovated, especially for the Internet of Things that we're hoping will be here in the next few years. Thank you. Any quick questions on this? One question. I think it's Annabelle.
First of all, brilliant. What a brilliant talk, Aya.
Wonderful.
Thank you. As you said, the value that is being created for data often comes from the fact that it can be mixed and changed. So in a way, you've explained the difficulty of ownership of data, but we understand from your talk that it is that very difficulty, in a sense, that makes it so easy to aggregate and get new value out of it. So my question is, we know from economics of innovation, there is a parallel that came to my mind when I heard your talk, about we know that innovation is very hard to protect because once it's out, it's easy for innovators, for copiers, to capture profits from it. And I wonder if perhaps a direction that we can think about is in the similar way that we have thought about how can innovation be protected. And there were some systems, such as, for example, from 18th century and before, the patenting system, to try to combine both the incentives to innovate as well as to create a space for commercialization. So I think we are at the cusp of profound rethinking of institutions to perhaps make advances on the paradox that you have highlighted so brilliantly.
Oh, thank you. Except for the patent part, I completely agree.
I mean, the patent is just an example of something vaguely similar.
That's the thing, the ownership system. So you're talking about some kind of a property rights system, some kind of a rights system. And with data, I think that's just going to be so much more difficult to set up. Data can come from lots of different sources. Sometimes you can pinpoint, okay, that data point actually came from Ashley Madison. So perhaps as a society, we can decide people who were in the Ashley Madison database have a right to take down that data. That could be a reasonable decision. But it would be, there's in a lot of cases, data can come from multiple sources. That's why it's so hard to control that.
But I think the fundamental insight that I think you're getting at, it was in the first subtitle of your first slide, which is we are in a world of control without ownership. And therefore, as so much of our institutions are fundamentally based on the concept of ownership in order to assert rights, we have to think now and look at the world around us to think, what were we achieving by ownership, which was control?
Oh, you're turning it around completely. So maybe we can do other things in the same, we can innovate in data and take those institutions to other spaces.
Precisely.
Okay, got it. Now I'm with you. Because there's going to be a lot of trial and error, mostly error first,
Exactly.
but we might figure out some ways of doing business
But that's the direction
that
of
can
travel.
be replicated in other services, for
That's
example.
the direction of travel.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Great comment. Okay. Thank you. Oh, we'll talk offline.
I just want to say that thanks, Aya, for a thought-provoking talk. I believe that the questions of data will be discussed throughout the day today, including the panel we have later in the afternoon, I believe other keynotes. So hopefully you get to ask your questions, not just to Aya, but to the whole community here, because data is going to be a big theme from what I know about the program. So we're going to kind of switch back to strategy in some sense with Hanna Halaburda, who will be talking about platform competition and multi-homing. Please welcome Hanna.
Thank you very much. This is joint work with Yanis Bakos, who is also a professor at Stern. And for the past decade, more or less, we have seen explosion of platforms, of two-sided platforms or multi-sided platforms that basically are defined by the fact that they are connecting different groups of customers. So Uber is connecting drivers and passengers, Airbnb is connecting homeowners and guests, and they can differentiate between those different groups of users. They need to take different strategies for each of the group of users, and they can price differently. So what we have known even longer since the explosion over the last decade is that multi-sided platforms are different than other businesses in terms of their pricing strategies. And this is because with multi-sided nature, there's interdependence between the sides that comes from the consumption complementarities. So having more drivers is more valuable to passengers. Having more homes to choose from is more valuable to potential guests. Having more guests is more valuable to the homeowners in the quest to join the platform. And this logic, this complementarities, kind of shows that it makes sense to subsidize. It makes sense to pay customers, and it is actually profitable. So why this is happening, very, very basic logic is since users on one side are getting more value, more benefit from it, more people on the other side, more agents on the other side, subsidy is going to bring more users on the other side, which is going to increase the value to the users on the first side. Now, the platform can either increase their market coverage or they can increase the price. They can charge higher price on one side while they are paying the other side to participate. A bulk of research over the past decade or so in platform competition was focusing on which side to subsidize. And this once novel insight that subsidy may be profitable became so ubiquitous that now everybody is expecting subsidies. And new startups, new platforms, they basically focus which side we should subsidize, but we surely should subsidize somebody. So we as customers, we get used to it. We expect our credit cards to give us benefits and our Uber to give us promotion codes, right? What we find in our research is that companies should be really careful in environments with multi-homing. Multi-homing is a situation where users of platforms are actually participating in multiple platforms at the same time. And this multi-homing may turn the subsidy logic on its head, and especially when we have multi-homing on both sides. So if agents on both sides are participating in multiple platforms, it may turn out that subsidy is no longer such a great profitable strategy. This case of multi-homing on both sides have been largely dismissed by theoretical literature for a number of reasons, but we actually have many markets that exhibit such properties. So for example, if we think about Uber and Lyft, a competition between platforms, and in ordinary environment, it would be advisable to the platforms to issue subsidy in order to become more competitive. We see multi-homing on both sides. Passengers would have both of their apps on their phones, and drivers also use both platforms, right? So why is multi-homing so important for the subsidy logic? is in ordinary setup, if the user has access to more agents on the other side, the platform is more valuable. Now, let's consider a situation when there is multi-homing, and that basically represents that there are some users on one side that are just on one platform, and a set of users that are participating in both platforms. And this happens on both sides. This is multi-homing on both sides. Now, if we take a user on one side, he has access to agents on the other side on both platforms. And he's meeting a lot of agents. And if some of those guys on the other side are also multi-homing, then our user is seeing the same agents on the other side twice on both platforms. But he doesn't get twice the benefit. So he's just seeing them double. Now, that means that we may have a situation where each platform offers a large number of agents on the other side, but the user is not willing to pay more for a larger number of those agents, because if he sees those agents on both platforms, he's not getting additional value. So now, if we think about an agent who is already on platform B and is now having access to all the other people on the other side of platform B, and is contemplating whether to additionally join platform A. Now, the question is how platform A can increase its attractiveness to this agent and therefore increase the market coverage or revenue, and whether subsidy is going to work. Well, first of all, the user who is contemplating joining, he already has access to a lot of agents that are already on platform A. So when he's deciding whether to join or not, he's going to look at the price, and he's going to look at how many agents on the other side platform A has to offer, but not the total number. He's just going to care about the agents on the other side that are exclusively offered by platform A, because he already sees the other ones on platform B. So now if platform A tries to make itself more attractive to this user and issues subsidy on the other side, it's going to increase the number of users on the platform, but it's not going to increase attractiveness. So it cannot increase the price. So now subsidy on one side does not allow to recuperate this investment by increasing the price on the other side. So with that, I mean, mathematically, because we have plenty of derivations to back this up, mathematically the difference seems trivial because it's just one term between the formulas. But basically, this one term means that there is interdependency between the two sides of the platform, and pricing on one side of my platform affects the attractiveness on the other side of my platform, or pricing on the other side of my platform does not matter. So this one term basically turns the logic of subsidy on its head and makes subsidy non-profitable in situation with multi-homing on both sides. So multi-homing on both sides, in this case, lowers platforms' profits unambiguously. And we actually can see it by prolonged competition between Uber and Lyft that has been going on for a long time. And even though both companies are increasing their networks and increasing the number of users, they don't seem to be able to push the other one out. And moreover, not only they are subsidizing the passengers, they are subsidizing both sides. They are entering the market, they are increasing coverage, but they try to starve each other, but they cannot push each other out. And this is because the passengers or the drivers do not need to choose, and they can be on both platforms at the same time. Therefore, it is not just a matter of time and duking it out, so to say, between the two companies. It is an inherent problem. And even Lyft and Uber seem to be getting grasp on this concept, and they notice that they need strategies to impose single homing, at least on one side. So instead of subsidizing in a situation where we have multi-homing on both sides, question is how to impose single homing where technologically single homing is not imposed. And we see that with the Rightpasses that suddenly kind of appeared about half a year ago. And through Rightpasses, so basically you pay a fixed fee up front, and then you get a significant discount later on. People get locked into the one platform, because if I know that the price difference is going to be large, I won't even look at the other app to check what is the price on the other app. And this induces single homing on one side, and now will allow for more profitable strategy, for example, through subsidization on the other side. Okay? So the bottom line is that if we have an environment with multi-homing on both sides, that traditional subsidy logic is not going to work. Thank you. Questions?
So when you say that subsidies don't work, you assume that subsidies only come from the owner of platform. But if you take Uber and Lyft, they actually piggyback on others. So Uber has American Express pays subsidies giving you, I don't know, $15 a month. So if you use American Express and they now team up with hotels and airlines and have them pay quote unquote subsidies by giving you points on hotels or airlines. So subsidies might not work if you pay yourself, but if you increase the ecosystem and have others pay for your subsidies, then it might work.
I mean,
at least they're trying to do that.
Generally, getting someone else paying your expenses is very sweet strategy. So of course, it's more profitable if someone else is paying your subsidy. But the question is whether paying subsidy and increasing the set of services that are accessible, whether it's going to really increase the willingness to pay of the users if there are multi-homing as well. So it may be what is important in the strategy that you mentioned is that it's getting outside of the market where Lyft is a direct competitor. So Uber is going into other markets, not just, or tries to connect to other markets, so that Lyft is not just a direct competitor.
You talked about how companies want to reduce multi-homing by focusing on single homing on one side or the other. Did you do any research on which side it's more effective to whether do single homing on the supplier side or the demand side?
Oh, so it depends. It's going to depend on elasticity of the site. So whether it's supply or demand, it depends on a particular market. But we have research that is going to answer this question for a particular market. Yeah.
Hi. Have you thought about how this changes if there's some type of consumption limit? So if an Uber driver is always getting enough clients, or if an Uber, like I have Lyft and Uber both on my phone, but I only use Lyft because I'm just always getting the rides that I need and I don't have time to price shop all the time. Does that change the way this plays out?
So actually it is important for this result that we have only some users on both sides at multi-home. Some multi-home, but not everybody multi-homes. Because if everybody multi-homes, then there is basically no competition, so to say. So users like you or the representative driver who only sticks with Lyft is very important because this is where the company tries to, Uber is going to try to get you on board and try to get you as a customer, and this actually will be a losing strategy. If they try to do it by subsidizing on the other side, because now subsidizing and getting more drivers that are multi-homing and they are also on Lyft is not making it any more attractive for you to switch to Uber.
Yeah, so it seems like you assume that there's, in a multi-home environment, there's just two providers. But of course, there are all the other folks who still use yellow taxis or call a car service. And one thing I noticed in my family, at least, is some of the laggards began to notice we were getting $3 rides from Lyft or Uber because of some of the crazy subsidies and competition. Doesn't that change in that you're now bringing in a whole new set of users? And so in that case, the subsidies actually work. They work for both companies. They work for the market as a whole. But yes, there's no single winner.
Yes, so we do assume here that there is no market expansion. So we have already covered the market, and some people argue that mostly Uber and Lyft covered most of the market. But even if you take into account that there is market expansion, that you can grow the market, it's not only fighting for the same customers but growing the market. Given how little market there is left to cover, how little market is not covered yet, then the effectiveness of subsidy is much smaller. There may be some effectiveness, but it is much smaller than if we consider a situation where most people are single homing. So for example, Melissa earlier was talking about video games. With video games, there are very few gamers who are multi-homing, who have two consoles. Typically, just by technology and just by the cost of multi-homing, we don't want to bother with multi-homing. And in those markets, even if just one site multi-homes, subsidy is again effective in competition and in getting revenue. But here, it is going to be much less effective because of this multi-homing.
Does the math change if you have 3 or 4 parties in your equation?
No.
Okay.
The number of parties does not change it. It changes if there is more market to uncover, then you can actually make this happen. Okay.
Hi, thank you. So I was wondering, in terms of the strategy for inducing single homing, what is the role of differences in technology between the platforms? In other words, whether the platforms can use technology design as a way to make some differences across the platforms, because sometimes we basically skew away from this issue of technology that seems that it gets standardized across the platforms and everything become a market, but we need to remember that these are design markets, right? So user benefits, both the user interface, but even the way you search in the market. So Apple seems to play a lot of focus on how you design the user interface for searching the apps. Thank you.
So in terms of ride sharing, we did see a lot of variance in design, and there were some ride sharing apps that did not really survive in the long term. And when we look at Uber and Lyft, for example, and Juno and a couple of others, they do differ, let's say, in user interface, but they do not differ in their underlying service that they are providing. Or wherever there is some advancement and development in one, it is quickly caught up. If it's worthwhile, it's caught up by the other one. The differences in user interface very often matches individual preferences of users. And this is where we get users who just prefer to use Lyft or prefer to use Uber. And not everyone is multi-homing. But yes, of course, you can imagine that there will be technology development so that one, like a new competitor will come in, basically provide such a superior service that is going to leave both Uber and Lyft in the dust, but then we have a different competitive environment, and then there is no direct competition to this new technology if it's so superior.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Wrapping it up.